Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling a subject that's really, at the heart of health, your cardiovascular system. You've shared a fantastic collection of information, and our goal today is, well, to boil it all down. Get to the most crucial, actionable steps you can take to prevent disease and really understand what influences your personal risk.
Exactly. There's so much information out there. It can feel overwhelming. We're here to extract the signal from
Mhm.
the noise,
Yeah.
give you clear, practical insights you can actually use.
And it's not an exaggeration to say this matters to everyone. I mean, globally, more than a third of deaths linked to cardiovascular issues. And a huge portion of us will face some form of heart or blood vessel problem. What's really striking is that atherosclerosis, this gradual damage and buildup in your artery walls, it seems almost universal as we age. You might dodge other major diseases, but some atherosclerosis probably happening.
But here's a really hopeful point from your sources. These diseases, well, they weren't always this widespread. They were actually pretty rare in the past, which strongly suggests that our modern lifestyle, our environment, they play a huge role.
Right.
And that means, we have significant power to influence how they develop, how they progress.
Absolutely. So the core mission here is empowerment, really. Equipping you with knowledge, helping you understand what you can actually do to minimize the impact of these diseases long term.
Yep. And to do that, we're going to focus on three sort of key areas that really stood out from your material. First, the optimal way to exercise for your heart. Second, the ideal diet, looking closely at cholesterol, insulin, and inflammation. And third, effective strategies for managing blood pressure.
Okay.
And we'll definitely cover the serious risks of smoking too, and how to break free from that habit.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Diet. And its profound connection to inflammation. We all kind of know the basics of healthy eating, less processed stuff, maybe more organic, but let's get specific. What really matters for cardiovascular health?
Right. Your sources correctly identify two central pillars: keeping cholesterol levels healthy and managing inflammation effectively. Cholesterol often gets the headlines, sure, but understanding and controlling inflammation, just as vital, maybe even more so sometimes.
It's like this constant background noise, isn't it? Inflammation is your body's response to damage or infection, good short term. But when it becomes chronic, like this persistent low simmer because of ongoing damage, that's the problem.
Exactly. And a fascinating link your sources highlight is insulin's role, the hormone managing blood sugar. Insulin resistance, often from diets high in those quick absorbing carbs, is not just linked to more inflammation, it also messes with nitric oxide production.
Nitric oxide, right? That helps our arteries relax and widen for better blood flow, like fueling your brain when you're concentrating or getting oxygen to muscles during exercise. So if insulin resistance blocks that, what happens?
Well, you get less oxygen, fewer nutrients delivered.
Yeah.
To your brain, your muscles, everywhere vital.
Yeah.
This can impact like everything from thinking clearly to physical performance, even, as your sources mention, erectile function.
Wow.
Plus, less flexible blood vessels. That directly contributes to higher blood pressure. Think of arteries like hoses. If they get stiff, flow is harder.
And it's not just the flexibility, right? The excess blood sugar itself is like an irritant, causes oxidation, more inflammation.
Precisely. It fuels that inflammatory response.
So boiling it all down, what's the crucial takeaway for you, the listener?
The core message is reduce your glycemic load.
Mm.
Basically, how much and how quickly the carbs you eat spike your blood sugar.
Okay, practically then, how do you lower that glycemic load?
Start by prioritizing low glycemic index foods. If you can, using a continuous glucose monitor gives amazing real-time feedback. But even just using a good glycemic index food list, like the ones in your sources, that's a huge help. And it's worth noting, diets like paleo and keto, they naturally tend to be lower in those high GI foods anyway.
Right. And it sounds like there's pretty strong agreement here. Cutting back on those rapidly absorbed sugars is a good idea for, well, almost everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And beyond glycemic load, your sources also touch on other dietary things that fuel general inflammation. We can maybe circle back to those when we talk blood pressure, because inflammation is a really big player there.
All right, inflammation covered. Now let's wade into cholesterol and lipoproteins. Often confusing territory. You hear such strong opinions, saturated fat is evil, or, cholesterol doesn't matter at all. What's the real story?
The key insight, I think, from your sources is that cholesterol itself is absolutely vital. It's not some poison we need to eliminate.
Right. Remind us why we actually need it. What's its job?
Well, it's fundamental for your cell membranes, give them structure, flexibility. It's also the precursor, the raw material for crucial hormones:
Mm.
cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone.
Okay.
And it's essential for making bile salts in your liver, which you need to digest fats properly.
So definitely not optional. But if we eat cholesterol, like in eggs or shrimp, does that directly raise our blood cholesterol? That's the common wisdom.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your sources explain the body's really good at regulating cholesterol. While we eat it, its impact on blood cholesterol is actually pretty limited for most people. Most of the cholesterol in your blood comes from your liver making it
Right.
and from reabsorbing those bile salts we mentioned, not so much directly from food.
Huh.
Typically, maybe only 10–15% of the cholesterol you eat gets absorbed, maybe a bit more if your body's own production is low.
Okay, that's actually pretty surprising. So that shrimp wasn't the main villain.
The cholesterol in the shrimp itself, probably not a huge effect. However, and this is crucial, saturated fats are different. Unlike cholesterol molecules, saturated fats get absorbed easily, and they do tend to increase LDL cholesterol, the bad kind.
Ah, okay, so it's more about the saturated fat in the food, not necessarily the cholesterol itself when we're talking LDL levels.
Exactly. Now, to add a layer, cholesterol and triglycerides, another fat type, they can't just float around in the blood. They need carriers, special proteins called apolipoproteins. Think of them like delivery trucks.
Gotcha. So when we eat fats, they get packaged up. How does that work?
Your intestines make a specific one, ApoB48. It helps form large particles, chylomicrons. These carry dietary fats from your gut into your lymph system, then the bloodstream. But to get to the liver for processing, they need another one, ApoE. If your ApoE isn't working well, it's harder to clear these fats. That can raise risk.
ApoE, like a key or an address label for the liver.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Helps the liver recognize and take them up.
Okay, so fats reach the liver. Then what?
The liver is the main hub. It packages triglycerides into VLDL, very low-density lipoprotein. VLDL goes out, delivers fatty acids to muscles, fat tissue, the heart. As it drops off cargo, it shrinks. It becomes LDL, the bad cholesterol.
That bad label, though, is it entirely fair? Is LDL the bad guy?
Well, our understanding's shifted. Your sources point out LDL's main job is essential, delivering cholesterol to tissues, which, as we said, you need for hormones, cell walls, etc. The problem isn't LDL existing, it's when it builds up in artery walls.
So it's not having LDL, it's where it ends up.
Precisely. And another key point,
Yeah.
not all LDL is the same. Your sources flag a specific type, lipoprotein A or LPA, as higher risk. You can measure this in blood tests. Also, ApoB100, a protein on LDL, is involved in depositing cholesterol in arteries. So the focus is shifting to these more specific markers.
Lipoprotein, what kind of levels should you aim for?
Ideally, below 14 milligrams per deciliter. Over 50. That's considered high risk. Interestingly, estrogen tends to lower it. Testosterone replacement in men with low TCAN2, statins, mixed evidence, but niacin, vitamin B3, can lower it 20–30%. And carnitine might help too.
So the takeaway seems to be focus more on lowering LPA and ApoB for risk, not just total LDL.
That's a really crucial insight, yeah. Your sources even mention high LDL alone doesn't consistently track with higher mortality. It's more about the type of LDL and the whole metabolic picture.
And what about the size of those LDL particles? You mentioned that briefly.
Yeah, size seems to matter. Smaller, denser LDL particles are generally thought to be more atherogenic, more likely to contribute to plaque.
Okay, this is getting clear. Now, triglycerides. Always on the standard panel. What's their role here?
Triglycerides are basically stored fatty acids, energy reserves.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, your body uses them for fuel, keeping blood levels pretty low.
So if my triglycerides are high, what's that telling me?
Often, it means your body isn't burning fat efficiently. It could be too many calories, especially from carbs, and often points to underlying insulin resistance, that issue again. Your body's basically storing excess energy as triglycerides in your blood.
Right. So solutions are cut back carbs, tackle insulin resistance, and, well, burn more fat through activity.
Exactly. And for exercise specifically targeting triglycerides, your sources highlight aerobic exercise at moderate intensity. Zone 2 training. It's very efficient at burning fat during the exercise. HIIT, high-intensity interval training, has benefits, sure, but it doesn't primarily burn fat while you're doing it.
Zone 2 training? How do I know I'm in that zone, practically speaking?
Good guideline is around 60% of your max heart rate, rough estimate. 220 minus your age, then takes 60% of that. More practically, the talk test. You should be able to talk, but like with some effort, not chatting easily.
Okay.
Another simple one is nasal breathing. Try to stay at an intensity where you can comfortably breathe through your nose.
Got it. Moderate effort, can talk, but not easily. Okay, let's shift to actionable dietary strategies. Improving cholesterol, reducing CVD risk. We hit lower glycemic load already. What else?
Well, re-emphasizing that low GI diet is key. But beyond that, Sources strongly push for more vegetables, high-quality animal products, pasture-raised, wild-caught fish, seafood.
Any supplements that might help lower insulin and glucose kind of support the diet.
Your sources list several with some promise. Cinnamon, soluble fibers like inulin, psyllium husk, berberine, bitter melon extract, apple cider vinegar, fenugreek seeds, curcumin, rosemary, gymnema sylvestre. But, these aren't magic pills. They support a good diet. Don't replace it.
And intermittent fasting. That's popular. Does it fit in?
It can be a really useful tool, yeah, for regulating insulin, glucose, triglycerides. Helps your body tap into fat stores. But as your sources rightly note, it's not risk-free. Something maybe for a deeper dive later.
So by making these diet changes, maybe adding supplements, maybe IF,
Uh-huh.
we can indirectly lower LDL and ApoB because there's less need to transport triglycerides?
Exactly. Now, for directly managing cholesterol with diet, the focus shifts to fat types. Prioritize unsaturated fats, nuts, avocados, extra virgin olive oil, olives. And try to limit or avoid the unhealthy ones, canola, industrial seed oils high in omega-6s.
Omega-3s always seem important for heart health.
Absolutely crucial for prevention. Best sources are fatty fish, wild-caught if possible, algae, seafood. Supplementing is often practical. Aim for at least 1 gram combined EPA daily.
What about those trans fats everyone warns about?
Definitely avoid them. They're bad news for cholesterol, lower your good HDL, raise your bad LDL, mainly found in industrial stuff like margarine. Small amounts of naturally occurring trans fats in some animal foods, probably less harmful.
And fiber. We mentioned it for blood sugar. Does it help cholesterol too?
Yes, soluble fiber specifically helps lower LDL. Good sources are those inulin-rich foods, asparagus, artichokes, leeks, onions, some cruciferous veg. Bonus, it feeds your good gut bacteria too.
Alcohol. I hear mixed things. Good for HDL, bad for pressure.
Yeah, it's tricky. Moderate intake might slightly raise HDL for some, but it can also raise blood pressure and has other risks. So not really a recommended health strategy.
And the basics still apply, right? Don't smoke, get exercise.
Absolutely fundamental. And for specific supplements, potentially helping cholesterol. Sources mention psyllium, husk, fiber, omega-3s, and CoQ10 for energy production.
What about meds, statins, and others? When do those come in?
Drugs like ezetimibe, bempedoic acid exist too, but your sources suggest they're usually considered after you've really tried lifestyle changes because of potential side effects, other factors.
So if someone wants a clearer blood test picture of their risk, what should they ask their doctor for?
Good question. Sources recommend a full lipid panel. Total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, the Castelli index, that's the HDL total cholesterol ratio, gives a sense of balance. And crucially, lipoprotein A and ApoB, they often give a more direct risk assessment than just total cholesterol.
What about more advanced tests, like calcium scans or genetic tests?
Things like genetic testing for ApoE risk, coronary artery calcium scans, which show calcium buildup, a later sign, or a carotid intima media thickness ultrasound for early detection. That are usually less common, especially if you're young without major risk factors. But for strong family history or other concerns, they can offer more insight.
Incredibly helpful. Okay, let's tackle that common confusion point. Cholesterol on low-carb diets like keto or paleo, you feel great, lose weight, markers improve, but LDL goes up. What's going on? How do you interpret that?
Yeah, very common scenario. And your sources give a good perspective. People often see amazing metabolic shifts on low carb, but rising LDL can be alarming, right? Leads to conflicting advice.
And the idea that it's just genetic, is that always the case?
Not always, no. Genetics play a role for sure, but sometimes family history is just shared unhealthy habits. Even with true genetic high cholesterol, familial hypercholesterolemia, sources say the evidence doesn't strongly link it to shorter lifespan across the board. So just because your parents had high cholesterol doesn't mean you're doomed, especially if you're proactive.
That's good to hear. But what about those initial successes on restrictive diets? Do they always last?
Critical point. Short-term wins don't guarantee long-term safety or sustainability. Initial improvements might not stick, and you have to weigh potential long-term risks of being very restrictive. Avoid thinking what worked at first is always the best path.
So when should someone on keto or paleo worry about high LDL and maybe tweak their diet?
According to your sources, if lipoprotein A or ApoB are high, then yes, dietary changes are worth considering. Total LDL. That's where views diverge. Conventional medicine often wants 100 mg/dL. Some low-carb experts think total cholesterol is less relevant if triglycerides are low and HDL is high.
What about triglycerides and HDL on these diets?
More agreement there. Aim for triglycerides under 150 mg/dL, even on low-carb shows you're using fat well. HDL. Higher is generally better. Conventional target, 40 mg/dL. Low-carb folks often like 50 mg/dL. High HDL is usually good, unless LDL is super low, which is rare.
So how should you interpret high LDL in that low-carb context?
Sources suggest it might be less concerning if triglycerides are low, good fat burning, and HDL is high. Also need to consider inflammation levels. LDL deposition needs artery damage. Ultimately, navigating this often needs a knowledgeable specialist who gets both sides.
Makes sense. Look at the whole picture. Okay, shifting gears. Hypertension, high blood pressure. What is it? Why is it so critical?
Basically, the force of blood against artery walls is consistently too high, makes the heart work harder. Over time, that strain damages blood vessels, organs, big health concern. Blood pressure fluctuates naturally, but chronic high levels are the issue.
What causes that increased resistance? The underlying mechanisms?
It's complex, honestly, not fully understood in every case, but it definitely gets more common with age. WHO estimates are staggering. Maybe 700 million people have it and don't know or aren't treated.
Wow. So what factors likely contribute?
Well, salt sensitivity is one, but it varies hugely person to person, partly genetic. High salt can raise BP in some, but doesn't necessarily cause the disease itself. Problematic if you already have hypertension, though. And our body's ability to ditch excess sodium gets less efficient as we age.
What about that Korean paradox? Low heart disease despite high salt intake.
Great example of the complexity. Suggests other factors matter. Maybe high potassium and magnesium in their traditional diet are protective. Data also shows very low and very high sodium intake can both be bad. It's about balance. So for people without hypertension, drastically cutting sodium might not be the best first move. Focus on other mechanisms.
Like what other mechanisms?
Low-grade inflammation in the kidneys can mess with sodium regulation. Loss of artery flexibility often linked to insulin resistance and inflammation. Again, that's a big one for raising pressure. The mosaic theory suggests it's usually a mix. Oxidative stress, immune function, kidneys, gut bacteria, nervous system activity, vessel health, genetics, and sodium. Think of hypertension as increased overall resistance in your vessels. Goal is to reduce that resistance with lifestyle changes.
We always hear systolic and diastolic numbers. What do they mean?
Systolic, the top number, is pressure when the heart contracts, pumps blood out. Diastolic, the bottom number, is pressure when the heart rests between beats.
And GFR, glomerular filtration rate. How does that relate?
GFR measures kidney filtering function. It tends to decline slowly with age, but a faster decline can signal poor biological aging. Measuring GFR estimated via creatinine, or more accurately with inulin, tells you about kidney health, which is tightly linked to blood pressure.
So dietary strategies to lower blood pressure naturally.
Reducing inflammatory foods is key processed stuff, those unhealthy industrial veg oils. Upping omega-3s from diet and supplements. Getting enough minerals, especially potassium and magnesium, crucial for vasodilation, relaxing vessels. Supporting healthy gut bacteria with fiber helps too. So, key diet focuses. Keep insulin stable and low. Boost magnesium and potassium. Limit alcohol.
Does weight loss help?
Definitely. Reduces external pressure on blood vessels. Stress management techniques can also make a difference.
And exercise. You mentioned it helps blood pressure.
Yes, huge impact. We'll get into the specifics of ideal exercise for cardio health next.
Okay, but before exercise, smoking.
Oh,
We have to talk about it. The info you shared makes it so clear how bad it is.
absolutely devastating. Beyond just heart and vessels, it damages hormones, accelerates skin aging, destroys collagen, tanks libido and sexual function, impairs brain function by damaging blood vessels there, massively increases cancer risk. The list goes on.
Focusing on the cardiovascular damage specifically, what does it do?
Hardens arteries, promotes inflammation inside vessels, making cholesterol buildup easier, oxidizes fats, raising CVD risk directly. It also tends to raise bad LDL, lower good HDL, and stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, worsening hypertension. Your sources are crystal clear. Quitting smoking is probably the single most impactful thing you could do for prevention, more than diet and exercise combined.
Wow, that's powerful. How does smoking damage compare to high blood pressure damage?
Both incredibly harmful, just slightly different ways.
Mhm.
Smoking is like direct chemical damage to the artery lining. High pressure is more mechanical stress. But both create the conditions for atherosclerosis to thrive.
What about smoking cannabis? Is it less harmful?
You know, the data just isn't there to say definitively it's less harmful for your cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
People might smoke less volume, but inhaling smoke from anything isn't great for vessels or lungs. Best to avoid smoking either.
And vaping. E-cigarettes. Safer nicotine source.
Sources say, nope, not harmless, linked to lung damage. Lungs are for gas exchange, oxygen in, CO2 out. Inhaling chemicals, they get absorbed, can cause damage anywhere.
For someone smoking or vaping now wanting to quit, how can they gauge their dependence level?
Good questions to ask yourself. How soon after waking up do you need it? Hard to avoid in smoke-free places. Which cigarette vape is hardest to give up? How many per day?
Hmm.
More in the morning? Smoke even when sick? These give clues.
Any sign it might be harder to quit vaping than cigarettes?
Some emerging evidence suggests, yeah, maybe harder for some. Could be nicotine delivery, the habits around it.
What are the core addiction mechanisms we need to understand for quitting success?
Well, nicotine is highly addictive. It triggers dopamine release, pleasure, reward. Your brain adapts, needs it, leading to withdrawal when you stop. Plus the habit, the oral fixation, social cues, they all play a role too.
So, what are the most effective strategies, the tools available?
Best approaches usually tackle both physical and psychological sides. Meds like bupropion affects dopamine can reduce cravings. Nicotine replacement patches, gum, lozenges gives nicotine without the smoke vape chemicals, helps you wean off gradually. Varenicline, cytosine, other meds acting on nicotine receptors to ease cravings, withdrawal. Often combining things works best. Medication plus behavioral support, for example.
Any supplements that might help a bit?
Sources mention L-tyrosine, mucunapurines might slightly nudge dopamine. And stress reduction is key for managing triggers. But honestly, these are way less potent than the meds. The real message is, use all the tools. Meds, support, behavioral strategies, willpower. Best shot at success, huge quality life gain.
Really comprehensive advice. Okay, final pillar, exercise. Sometimes feels like fitness focuses on muscle, cardio gets overlooked. Why is it so vital?
Your sources list tons of benefits. Big drop in CVD risk, more energy, maybe slower aging, better sexual function, faster recovery from workouts, just better overall quality of life.
But we said exercise can't totally erase bad habits like smoking or poor diet. So why prioritize cardio if other things aren't perfect?
True, it doesn't negate everything,
Yeah.
but it still provides massive benefits. Studies show even healthy weight people with good cardio fitness measured by VO2 max have like 5 times lower CVD risk than those with poor fitness.
Wow.
That really underlines its impact on health and longevity.
So what are the two big concepts for effective cardio training?
First is improving mitochondrial capacity. Mitochondria are cell powerhouses.
Yeah.
Active cells, brain neurons, heart muscle need tons of energy. Mitochondrial problems are linked to aging. So goal one is boosting their energy production capacity, maxing anaerobic metabolism, increasing VO2 max. This needs high-intensity work.
Okay, mitochondria, what's the second concept?
Building a strong aerobic base, adapting your body to sustain longer efforts without getting wiped out, improves overall endurance. This needs training below a certain aerobic threshold. Easier intensity, easily recoverable.
HIIT, high-intensity interval training. We hear about it a lot. How does that fit?
HIET is great for boosting mitochondrial density and VO2 max, that first concept. But moderate intensity aerobic exercise, zone 2 training, is also incredibly important and often missed.
Zone 2. You mentioned it for fat burning earlier. What are its other key benefits?
Spending about 80% of your aerobic time in zone 2 does a lot. Improves fat burning even at higher intensities, helps clear lactate faster, less muscle fatigue, better muscle metabolic health, builds more efficient mitochondria, enhances metabolic flexibility. Your body gets better at switching between carbs and fats for fuel.
So zone 2 is building that efficient aerobic engine. How do we know we're in zone 2? Practical signs.
We mentioned the test talking, but with some effort. Nasal breathing test, can you breathe mostly through your nose? Heart rate is generally around 60–70% of your max. And as you get fitter, your zone 2 improves. You can do more work while staying in that zone.
It's interesting you said higher calorie burn in intense workouts doesn't always mean more fat loss. Explain that.
Right. High-intensity stuff like some CrossFit WODs burns lots of calories, yes, but often relies more heavily on carbs for fuel during the workout. Zone 2 specifically targets slow-twitch muscle fibers and primarily uses fat for energy while you're doing it.
So for optimal heart health, what's the ideal mix of zone 2 and intense stuff like HIIT?
Sources suggest aiming for roughly 80% of your total weekly aerobic time in Zone 2, 20% HIIT. So if you do, say, 7 hours aerobic per week, that's about 5.5 hours. Zone 2, minimum 30-minute sessions, and 1.5 hours of shorter, intense interval sessions. Zone 2 is also great for active recovery after lifting weights.
Beyond heart and muscles, any cognitive benefits from aerobic exercise?
Oh yeah, big time. Increases blood flow to specific brain areas, improves cognitive performance, learning, memory, and improves blood flow to all organs, really. Both aerobic and resistance training are like natural nootropics, brain enhancers.
Last point, timing. Does it matter when we do aerobic exercise? Before, after meals? Around lift?
A few things to think about. Fasted cardio, like before breakfast if you do IF, can increase fat burning during that session. Probably best to avoid intense cardio right before lifting weights, though. Can deplete muscle glycogen, make lifting less effective. If doing both in one session, not fasted, recommended order is often lift first, then zone 2 cardio, maybe finish with short HIAT. As for optimal time of day, focusing on consistency, finding a time you can actually stick with is usually more important than trying to hit a perfect circadian window for, say, testosterone.
Wow. Okay. We have covered an absolutely enormous amount of ground today. Really, thanks to the wealth of information you provided, it's so clear there are many, many impactful steps you can take to prioritize your cardiovascular health.
Absolutely. The crucial thing now is to take what resonated most with you, and start weaving those strategies into your life. And just a reminder, of course, this was a general overview based on the material. It's not personalized medical advice. If you have existing heart conditions, definitely talk to your doctor before starting any high-intensity exercise. Very important.
Yeah, definitely. And creating this kind of deep dive, it takes a lot of work. So if you found this valuable, your feedback, your engagement, it's really appreciated as we think about future explorations.
Ultimately, yeah, making cardiovascular prevention a priority. Integrating these strategies is
Yeah.
one of the best investments you can make in your long-term health, your well-being. It's really about equipping yourself for a healthier, more vibrant future.